Joining us right now, Representative Mike Rogers, former congressman from the Wolverine state of Michigan, and also former House Intelligence Committee chairman. Now you hear him here, of course, WMAL in the mornings, and he's on CNN and all that jazz. Thanks for joining us, Congressman.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
I got to ask you about this drone strike from last week, and a lot of people are pointing at intelligence failures as the reason why, tragically, the American hostage from right here in Rockville, Maryland, was killed in this attack. First of all, do you agree, was this an intelligence failure, or is it more of a policy failure in terms of how drones are being used right now in the war on terror?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with either one of those premises, Larry.
Okay.
So, first of all, two things. The intelligence was right. The people that were killed in the strike, the terrorists, were the right kind of people. These are folks that were planning to kill Westerners. These are the people who kidnapped the hostages and were maintaining the hostages. The failure point here was likely that they didn't know, even after extensive work. And by the way, none of these things happen pretty quickly. All of this takes months. That these the hostages had been holed up there for a long time, hadn't been let out. They didn't know that particular part. They didn't have that particular acuity. But this was a change in the way al-Qaeda operated. Normally, they wouldn't bring hostages of what they would consider high value into areas where we conduct counterterrorism strikes. So that part, you could say it's a failure. It's really a fundamental change in the way they operate. But the intelligence itself was right. It was a safe house. It did kill senior-level al-Qaeda planners and others in the operation. The tragedy was, obviously, that it killed the hostages.
Let me just a quick follow-up.
As far as it went.
Yeah, but when I say is it a failure of the policy that we use in terms of using drones, it seems to me that it would have really been valuable to have these guys captured, these bad dudes that we ended up killing, and get some more intelligence. Are we capturing any al-Qaeda members or ISIS members or terrorists and actually getting information from them?
Well, and has been a big debate when I was chairman about, you're closing Gitmo. We have nowhere to take these people if you take them off the battlefield.
So let's just kill them with drones instead.
Well, exactly right. Now, I do think that the drone program has been incredibly impactful. It's been the most disruptive counterterrorism program that the U.S. government has. The problem is that we would like to get more folks captured and interrogated so that you can get information of value from them. So, yes, I agree on both fronts. The problem is when the president decided he had nowhere to put them, then there was no really other option. You can't let them continue to operate where they plan, finance, train, and even give operational direction for terrorism attacks against soldiers in Afghanistan and we think Westerners, including operations to plan here in the United States.
All right, so I want to turn to you, to this gyrocopter guy who flew a gyrocopter all the way down from Pennsylvania, some 90-minute flight that ended up flying at treetop level right up the mall and landing on the west front of the Capitol. When you saw that report, what was the thing that crossed your mind about it?
Well, obviously this is a huge lapse in security, and they're going to have to do a couple of things. But they said they
knew he was doing it, and they actually have said, "Oh, we were tracking him, and we made a decision not to take him out."
Yeah, again, I think that anyone that enters that airspace, you don't have a lot of options. Now, if you decide to enter that airspace and have no way to communicate, I have bad news for you. Well, you should have bad news for them.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're going to get landed safely. You're going to come to an untimely end. You cannot tolerate those breaches in that airspace because with this proliferation of commercial drones, this is going to be a huge and growing problem. You saw what happened at the White House. Now you saw the guy in a gyrocopter, which is one step up from a drone you buy at your local store.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And with that kind of a problem, they're going to have to show pretty clearly that this stuff can't be tolerated, and which means they'll have to find ways to engage those targets in a way that's safe to the people around them, but it also protects the airspace.
I suspect that they interviewed this guy beforehand, and before he said he was going to do it, and they went to interview him, they must have decided he wasn't much of a threat. They must have thought, well, even if he ran into the Capitol, what harm could he do with that little gyrocopter? But if it were a plane, a real plane, everybody always talks about crop dusters as being something that could be very, very dangerous. If this had been a crop dusting plane that they were tracking, you're pretty sure they would have taken a different action?
Well, I'm not sure. They've confused me to death on this. You cannot allow any aircraft. So I go and interview them. As an FBI agent, I used to say I've never met a guilty man in jail. Right? They're always innocent,
right.
Every one of them. And so you're going to go talk to him. You can come away from 1 or 2 or even 3 interviews and say, I think he seems okay. But he decides that night that he's going to load it up with a radiological material or a biological material or fill-in-the-blank material or something more explosive, or he overfuels it even by accident and gets into the airspace and flies into the Capitol. I mean, none of those are acceptable, and you have to have the zero-tolerance rule on this airspace for that very reason. Why? Because we know that there are people out there, we have very good intelligence, that they'd love to try to pull off an event like that. So, this notion that, we don't think he's going to hurt anybody is always the wrong standard.
Yeah. Representative Mike Rogers is our guest, and you were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House, of course. You were privy to a lot of stuff going on, privy to stuff that a lot of us never hear about, I would say. When this whole uranium deal with Russia was going down and the Canadian influence and all of that stuff, was that on your radar, and did Congress chime in? And I wonder, did you ever, did the State Department ever testify or give you information about their concerns, or whether they even had any concerns? Because now we see the cash was rolling in to the Clinton Foundation, and lots of friends of Bill were part of this.
Well, this is a huge problem. We saw that the Russians tried to engage the Iranians in years past with this deal of they would enrich uranium and you could have a civilian program before the talks even began. So what was frustrating to us is once they engaged in these secret talks, which I still believe violated the law, in Oman, to even engage Iran in the talks, they were engaging the P5+1, which included Russia. Which was, so they decided to do that and not inform the national security committees that provide oversight for these things, and really are the catch-all to say, boy, that's really stupid. Did you think about these 5 things that are going to happen when you do this?
Well, in those conversations, those were during the first term, correct?
Yeah.
Or were they? So that means Secretary of State Clinton approved of those secret discussions with Iran and approved of the fact that Russia was at the table, and at the same time, her foundation was taking money from Russian organizations. It gets a little worse, doesn't it, this scandal?
Well, if we would be remiss, I think we, the American people, to not call for all and complete transparency, including the investigation if it concluded that.
You think the Department of Justice needs to conduct an investigation now at this point?
Well, it's hard to say. Did they violate any laws? I'm not sure. But
only an investigation would tell us.
Congressional investigation would warrant to find the precursors if, in fact, that there was some criminal violation. Because clearly this Justice Department is not going to do it. And I argue, listen, if you're engaged in this type of an activity, including, by the way, the potential for legitimizing Iran's nuclear capability, which is, by the way, what the deal will do on its best day, that thing ought to have been completely squeaky clean, which tells you why they all did this in secrecy. They didn't want people to know. None of that is good, and the outcome clearly, I think, is showing that it was a serious mistake, and there may have been malfeasance along the way.
We got to leave it right there. Representative Mike Rogers, always a pleasure to have you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.